The rain over Brooklyn didn't just fall tonight, it felt like it was trying to punish the city. It lashed against the thin glass of our apartment window, a relentless, freezing drumbeat that matched the hollow pounding in my chest. 7 candles burned down to their wicks on the small dining table. 7 years. The roasted rosemary chicken I had spent 3 hours perfecting was completely cold, the fat congealing on the fine china we only used for special occasions. I sat there in the dim light, listening to the ticking of the wall clock. It was 11:45 p.m. When the front door finally clicked open, the suffocating scent of judgment and high-end arrogance entered before he did. Carter stepped into the entryway, his bespoke Wall Street suit perfectly tailored, his hair flawlessly styled. He didn't look like a man who had just rushed home through a storm to celebrate an anniversary. He looked like a man who had just closed a very lucrative, very dirty deal. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look at the table. Instead, he walked straight into the living room and tossed a thick cream-colored envelope onto the coffee table. "Sign it," Ethan Carter said. His voice was smooth, polished, and entirely devoid of the warmth I had spent my entire 20s clinging to. I didn't move. I just stared at the envelope. "What is that?" "It is over," he stated simply, casually unbuttoning his suit jacket. "I am marrying Spencer tomorrow, the mayor's son. It has been in the works for months. You and we were a nice college phase, Ethan, but I need a partner who can elevate my status, not an antique restorer who smells like dust and wood varnish." The words should have killed me. They should have shattered my heart into a million jagged pieces, leaving me screaming and sobbing on the floor. But as I looked at the man I had loved for 7 years, I didn't feel a breakdown coming. I just felt numb, a cold, creeping paralysis spreading through my veins. I reached out and opened the envelope. It wasn't just a breakup letter. There were 2 documents inside. The first was a tabloid printout, slated for tomorrow's morning edition. The headline blared in bold, ugly letters, "Wall Street prodigy Carter Hayes dumps cheating lover for mayor's son." I looked up, my amber eyes narrowing. Cheating. Damage control. Carter shrugged, pouring himself a glass of my expensive whiskey. Spencer's family needs a clean narrative. A tragic betrayal makes me the victim. It secures the sympathy vote for the mayor's re-election campaign. Don't take it personally. It is just business. "You are destroying my reputation to build your stage," I whispered, the sheer audacity of it suffocating the air out of the room. Which brings us to the second document. Carter continued, completely ignoring my horror. He pointed a manicured finger at the remaining papers. "My firm took a massive hit last quarter. We owe $30 million to some very unpleasant people. People who don't take payment plans." I looked down. It was a marriage contract, a surrogate agreement. My name was printed on the line of the spouse, but the other name, Dominic Valenti. The paper felt like it burned my fingers. Even here in a small apartment in Brooklyn, everyone knew that name. It was a ghost story whispered in the blood-stained alleys of the Bronx and the glittering penthouses of Manhattan. Dominic Valenti was the apex predator of the New York underworld. The rumors said a car bomb had taken his legs and his sanity 2 years ago, turning him into a crippled, half-mad monster who ruled his empire from the shadows with the capriciousness of a rabid dog. They demanded a blood tie or a marriage to forgive the debt. Carter said, his voice finally losing a fraction of its arrogance, replaced by a tremor of real fear. "I can't marry him, Ethan. I have a future. I have Spencer. Valenti agreed to take you instead. You sold me." The realization tasted like ash in my mouth. "You sold me to a mafia boss to pay off your bad investments. You owe me." Carter suddenly snapped, slamming his glass down. "I gave you the best years of my life. I housed you. I tolerated your pathetic, unambitious life. Now it is time you paid your rent. Ethan, you signed that contract, and the car waiting downstairs takes you to Long Island. You don't sign it, and Valenti's men will kill us both before sunrise. Though, honestly, they would probably start with you." I looked at Carter, really looked at him. I saw the cowardice hiding behind his expensive suit, the pathetic desperation in his eyes. For 7 years, I thought I was holding on to a diamond, only to realize I had been bleeding my hands dry to hold on to a piece of broken glass. I didn't cry. There were no tears left for a man who didn't exist. The naive boy who had cooked rosemary chicken and lit 7 candles died in that exact second. I picked up the pen from the table. I didn't hesitate. I didn't let my hand shake. I signed my name with a sharp, aggressive stroke, throwing away my youth, my past, and my illusions like a bag of rotten trash. I stood up, walking past him without a second glance. Ethan Carter called out a smug, victorious smirk returning to his face. "Enjoy the wheelchair duty." I didn't answer. I walked out of the apartment, down the narrow stairs, and out into the freezing New York night. A massive armor-plated black Cadillac was idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the heavy rain like demon eyes. Two men in pitch-black suits looking like reapers molded from granite opened the back door for me. I didn't look back at the apartment window. I didn't look back at the life that had just betrayed me. I stepped into the leather-scented darkness of the Cadillac, the heavy door slamming shut behind me, sealing my fate. The engine gave a low, predatory growl, and the car slipped into the storm, carrying me away from a broken heart and straight toward the devil himself. The air in the abandoned cathedral was thick with the scent of damp stone, rotting wood, and forgotten prayers. Located somewhere on the desolate fringes of Staten Island, the building had been decommissioned decades ago. The stained glass windows were choked with grime, filtering the bleak afternoon light into fractured, bruised shades of purple and gray. It was 3 p.m. Across the river in the glittering heart of Manhattan, the social event of the decade was beginning. I could picture it perfectly. The Plaza Hotel dripping in crystal and white orchids, a string quartet playing classical music, the mayor of New York shaking hands with Wall Street billionaires while Carter, my Carter, or rather the illusion I had loved for 7 years, stood at the altar in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, smiling his perfect deceitful smile next to Spencer. They were stepping into the light, bathing in applause and fake adulation, and I was standing in the shadows waiting for the devil. I looked down at myself. I was wearing an off-the-rack white suit I had bought 3 years ago for a friend's summer party. It felt thin and cheap against the bone-chilling draft of the cathedral. There were no flowers here, no guests, just me standing at the dust-covered altar flanked by 4 men in pitch-black suits who hadn't spoken a single word since they shoved me into the Cadillac last night. They stood like gargoyles, their hands resting casually over the hidden bulges in their jackets. I was waiting for a man in a wheelchair, a crippled half-mad monster with a ruined body and a fractured mind coming to claim his collateral. My stomach twisted into tight, agonizing knots. I closed my eyes, preparing myself for a lifetime of nursing a violent tyrant, of paying for Carter's greed with my own flesh and blood. A heavy creaking sound echoed through the room. The massive iron-reinforced oak doors at the back of the cathedral didn't just open, they were pushed apart with a heavy, echoing groan that sent a flock of pigeons scrambling frantically into the rafters. The wind howled through the entrance, bringing with it the smell of ozone and rain. I opened my eyes, my breath catching in my throat. Footsteps. The sound of slow, deliberate leather shoes striking the stone floor echoed with terrifying precision. There was no squeak of a wheelchair, no shuffling of a broken man. The gargoyles standing around me instantly stiffened, bowing their heads in absolute terrified reverence. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. Out of the shadows of the vestibule stepped a man who looked like he had been carved from the very obsidian of the Underworld. He was incredibly tall, easily over 6'3", with broad commanding shoulders that filled out a bespoke pitch-black Italian 3-piece suit. He moved with the terrifying silent grace of an apex predator. His hair was dark as a raven's wing swept back to reveal a face that was devastatingly handsome, yet entirely ruthless. High cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and a faint, thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that froze the blood in my veins. They were the color of a thunderstorm, a swirling, cold, merciless gray. Dominic Valenti, the Reaper of New York. He wasn't crippled. He wasn't mad. He was a king at the absolute height of his lethal power. Carter, that arrogant blind fool, had believed the street rumors. He had handed me over to the most dangerous, fully capable alpha predator on the eastern seaboard. Dominic didn't look at the guards. He didn't look at the crumbling architecture. His storm cloud eyes were locked entirely on me. Every step he took toward the altar felt like a hammer striking the anvil of my heart. Panic urged me to step back to run, but my legs were rooted to the floor. The sheer, suffocating gravity of his presence held me captive. He stopped just a breath away from me. Up close, he smelled of rich sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and the sharp, metallic tang of gunpowder. "Ethan," he said. His voice was a low, vibrating rumble that seemed to travel through the floorboards and directly into my bones. It was smooth, dark, and intoxicating. Hearing my name on his tongue felt like a brand. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his terrifying gaze. You are walking. A dark, dangerous smirk played at the corner of his lips. The world only sees what I allow it to see. A perceived weakness draws out the rats. Your ex-boyfriend being one of the more pathetic ones. He didn't wait for a priest. There were no vows to be exchanged in the eyes of God because Dominic Valenti clearly answered to no one. He reached into the inner pocket of his vest and pulled out a ring. It wasn't a standard gold band. It was a thick, heavy band of black platinum encrusted with a massive, rare black diamond that seemed to swallow the dim light of the church. He didn't grab me aggressively. Instead, to my utter shock, the ruthless Mafia lord reached out and took my left hand. His grip was firm, his large, calloused fingers wrapping around my trembling ones with a surprising, almost reverent gentleness. He slid the heavy ring onto my finger. The cold metal settled against my skin, a physical chain binding me to the underworld. Mine, Dominic whispered a vow far more binding than anything a priest could have muttered. He lowered his head, his dark hair brushing against my knuckles, and pressed his lips to the back of my hand. The kiss was warm, lingering, and possessive. Right at that exact second as his lips touched my skin, a sharp beeping sound echoed in the silent church. One of the guards stepped forward instantly, holding out a sleek, high-tech tablet. Dominic released my hand, took the tablet, and tapped the screen. He then handed it to me. I believe it is customary to receive gifts on one's wedding day. Look. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was a high-definition live security feed. I instantly recognized the opulent ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. Carter and Spencer were standing at the flower-draped altar exchanging rings. The mayor was beaming in the front row. The room was packed with the elite of Wall Street and politics. It was the picture-perfect climax of Carter's betrayal. "Wait for it," Dominic murmured, standing close behind me, his chest almost brushing my back. On the screen, the clock struck 3:05 p.m. Suddenly, the massive three-story indoor decorative fountain behind the altar erupted. It wasn't water, it was a geyser of thick, foul-smelling black sludge sewage mixed with industrial dye, blasting out with the force of a fire hose. The sludge hit the altar head-on. Carter's expensive white tuxedo was instantly annihilated, plastered to his body in a horrific dripping mess. Spencer screamed, slipping on the slick marble floor and tumbling face-first into the filthy puddle. Panic erupted. The elite guests scrambled over each other like rats on a sinking ship, their designer gowns ruined by the spray. Before anyone could recover, the grand crystal chandeliers sparked violently, and the entire ballroom was plunged into absolute chaotic darkness. The emergency sprinklers activated, raining down on the ruined, screaming crowd. There were no casualties, no bullets, just pure, unadulterated public humiliation broadcasted live across every society network in the city. Carter's perfect day, his political alliance, his meticulously crafted image, destroyed in 10 seconds. I stared at the screen, my breath shallow. I watched the man who had discarded me like trash, flailing in the mud in front of the entire city. I expected to feel horror. I expected to be terrified of the man standing behind me, a man who could snap his fingers and orchestrate the downfall of New York's elite without even being in the room. But as the screams echoed from the tablet's tiny speakers, the cold numbness in my chest shattered. A warm, dark, venomous thrill rushed through my veins. The betrayal that had suffocated me for 24 hours was suddenly eclipsed by a rush of pure satisfaction. "I don't like sharing the spotlight on my wedding day," Dominic whispered, his breath ghosting over my ear, making a shiver run down my spine. "Do you like our gift, Tesoro?" I looked away from the screen and turned to face him. The trembling in my hands had completely stopped. I looked at the devil, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I looked at the black diamond shining on my finger, then met his storm cloud eyes. A genuine, dangerous smile curved my lips. "It is perfect," I breathed. Dominic's eyes darkened with raw, undeniable hunger. He offered me his arm. I didn't hesitate. I slipped my hand through it, the fabric of his suit rough against my skin. We turned our backs on the altar and walked down the aisle together. The heavy doors opened to the storm outside, but I wasn't cold anymore. I walked out into the rain not as a victim, not as a prisoner, but as the queen of the New York underworld. Living with Dominic Valenti was nothing like the prison sentence I had braced myself for. There were no locked doors in the sprawling three-story penthouse overlooking Central Park. There were no chains, no curfews, and absolutely no disrespect from the small army of men who guarded the perimeter. I was not a hostage. From the moment I walked through those reinforced steel doors with the black diamond heavy on my left hand, I was treated as absolute royalty. I was the consort, the queen of the New York underworld. Your grip is too tense, Ethan. You are holding it like you are afraid it is going to bite you. Dominic's voice was a low, dark, velvet rumble right beside my ear. We were in the soundproofed, state-of-the-art firing range built deep into the sub-basement of the building. The air smelled heavily of spent brass and cordite. He stepped up behind me, his broad chest pressing flush against my back. I felt the heat radiating from him through his crisp white dress shirt. His large, calloused hands covered mine gently, adjusting my fingers around the cold, heavy grip of the matte black 9mm Glock. I restore antique lamps, Dominic. I breathed my heart, doing a strange, frantic flutter that had nothing to do with the lethal weapon in my hands. I don't end lives. In this world, you're either the predator or the prey. Dominic murmured his breath, ghosting over the sensitive skin of my neck. He didn't mock my past. He never did. I will burn this city to the ground before I let anyone hurt you to sorrow. But I need to know that if the wolves ever breach the gates, you have the fangs to bite back. He slowly raised my arms, aligning the sights with the paper target 50 feet away. Breathe in. Hold it. Squeeze, don't pull. I held my breath. The world narrowed down to the front sight, the target, in the overwhelming grounding presence of the Alpha behind me. I squeezed the trigger. A deafening gunshot rang out. The recoil sent a shockwave up my arms, but Dominic's firm grip kept me completely steady. I looked down the range. A perfect hole right in the center of the target's chest. Perfection, Dominic praised, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to my temple. Just like you. For the first 3 weeks, this was our rhythm. He didn't hide his world from me, he integrated me into it. He taught me how to read the deceptive smiles of corrupt politicians at underground galas. He showed me the ledgers, the territories, the power dynamics of the 5 families. He handed me the keys to his empire without a single ounce of hesitation. I had expected a monster. Instead, I found a man who would part the Red Sea if I asked him for a glass of water. The trauma of Carter's betrayal began to scab over, replaced by a terrifying, intoxicating devotion to the Reaper of New York. But I had forgotten that a Reaper, no matter how gentle with his own, was still a creature forged in blood. The illusion of total safety shattered on a rainy Thursday night. I was sitting in the library reading a book by the fireplace when the secure private elevator chimed. The heavy mahogany doors didn't just open, they were violently thrown apart. Get the medic now. It was Rico, Dominic's second in command, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. My book dropped to the floor. I rushed out into the grand foyer, and the sight that met me made my blood run ice cold. 4 heavily armed guards were backing away toward the walls, their weapons lowered but their hands shaking. In the center of the marble floor stood Dominic. His expensive suit was shredded. He was drenched in blood, so much blood that his white shirt was a sickening slick crimson. He had taken a grazing bullet to the shoulder, but the sheer volume of gore coating his hands and face clearly belonged to other men. Men he had torn apart. Dom, I screamed, running forward. No, Ethan, stop. Don't go near him, Rico yelled, stepping in front of me, his eyes wide with genuine terror. He is in the red zone. The ambush. It was a slaughter. The smell of blood triggered it. Triggered what I demanded, trying to push past the capo. The curse, Rico whispered, his voice trembling. When he takes too much damage, when the bloodlust takes over, he forgets who he is. He doesn't recognize anyone. He becomes a mindless beast. He nearly killed 2 of our own men in the car. You have to lock yourself in the safe room until the sedatives can be administered. I looked at Dominic. He was hunched over his chest, heaving violently. He let out a sound that wasn't human, a raw, guttural, deafening roar that rattled the crystal chandeliers above us. He grabbed a heavy marble console table that weighed at least 300 pounds and hurled it across the room like it was made of cardboard. It shattered against the wall in an explosion of stone and plaster. The guards flinched, preparing to draw their weapons on their own boss out of sheer self-preservation. Dominic's eyes, usually the color of a calm storm, were completely dilated, pitch-black pools of pure, untethered violence. He was trapped in a nightmare of endless war, ready to slaughter anything that moved. He locked his dead predatory eyes onto Rico, his muscles bunched, preparing to lunge and snap the capo's neck. I didn't think. The survival instincts Dominic had been teaching me completely vanished. Stand down, all of you, I ordered the guards. Before anyone could stop me, I shoved Rico aside and stepped directly into the path of the Reaper. I walked across the shattered marble and broken glass, my bare feet ignoring the sharp cuts. Ethan no Rico screamed. Dominic snarled. He moved with blinding speed, closing the distance between us in a fraction of a second. His massive, blood-soaked hand slammed into my throat, pinning me hard against the nearest pillar. The impact knocked the wind out of me. His grip was iron, slowly crushing my windpipe. I looked up into the face of the monster. There was no recognition in his eyes, only the urge to kill. One squeeze, and my neck would snap like a twig. I didn't fight back. I didn't claw at his hands. Instead, I reached up with both of my hands, my fingers trembling slightly, and gently cupped his blood-smeared face. Dominic, I choked out my voice, barely a whisper, but filled with absolute, unwavering certainty. His jaw locked. The pressure on my throat didn't increase, but it didn't lessen either. "It is me," I murmured, using my thumbs to softly wipe the drying blood from his sharp cheekbones. I poured every ounce of the warmth, the peace, and the unspoken love growing in my chest into that single touch. "It is Ethan, your husband. You are safe. The war is over for tonight. Come back to me." For 3 agonizing seconds, the world held its breath. Then Dominic blinked. The pitch-black void in his eyes began to fracture, revealing the familiar swirling gray storm underneath. He looked at my face, then down at his massive hand wrapped around my throat. A sharp, violent gasp tore from his lips, as if he had just been pulled from the bottom of the ocean. He yanked his hand away, as if my skin burned him, stumbling backward. The horrific realization of what he had almost done crashed over him, crumbling the unstoppable Mafia boss into a broken man. "Ethan," he rasped, his voice shattering. "God, Ethan, I am a monster. I almost lost control." He sank to his knees right there on the ruined floor, bearing his blood-soaked face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with the terrifying vulnerability he never showed the world. I didn't hesitate. I dropped to my knees right in front of him, heedless of the blood and the broken glass ruining my silk pajamas. I threw my arms around his broad, shaking shoulders, pulling his heavy head into the crook of my neck. "You are not a monster," I whispered fiercely, burying my hands in his dark hair, holding him as tightly as I could. "You are my husband. I have got you. I am right here." Dominic let out a broken, shuddering breath. His massive arms came up, wrapping around my waist in a crushing, desperate grip, burying his face in my neck as he inhaled my scent like it was the only oxygen left in the world. Right there, surrounded by terrified guards and the ruins of the foyer, the final invisible wall between us completely collapsed. Carter had promised me a neat, pristine, perfect life, only to throw me to the wolves. Dominic Valenti was covered in blood chaos and darkness, but as he held me trembling on the floor, I knew the absolute truth. He was my sanctuary, and I was his cure. 2 months in the Underworld can fundamentally rewrite the architecture of your soul. I sat in the glass-walled conservatory of our Long Island estate, the afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across the imported Italian marble floor, the scent of blooming orchids mixed with the sharp metallic tang of gun oil. Restoring antique lamps required patience, a steady hand, and an appreciation for the delicate mechanics of the past. As it turned out, assembling a high-powered sniper rifle required the exact same skill set. I ran an oiled cloth over the heavy matte black barrel, my movements methodical and calm. Dominic had gifted it to me a week ago. For long-distance problem-solving, he had murmured, kissing the back of my neck. I was just locking the bolt assembly into place when the heavy glass doors of the conservatory burst open. "Ethan." I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for the panic button. I just slowly looked up from the receiver of the rifle. Standing in the doorway, panting heavily, was Carter. If I hadn't spent 7 years of my life memorizing his face, I might not have recognized him. The Wall Street golden boy was entirely gone. His clothes, once immaculate bespoke suits, were wrinkled and hung loosely on his shrinking frame. His hair was a disheveled mess, his eyes sunken and frantic. The sewage shower at the plaza had apparently been the least of his problems. Spencer's family had completely disowned him. After the public humiliation, his firm had been investigated for fraud, and his assets had been frozen. He was a walking ghost of a ruined empire. "Ethan, my God, I finally found you," Carter gasped, stumbling into the room. He looked around wildly, taking in the opulent surroundings before his eyes locked onto me. He fell to his knees, crawling a few paces across the marble. "I knew it. I knew they were keeping you locked up in here." I stared at him. I was wearing a silk robe that cost more than his remaining net worth, sitting on a velvet chaise lounge, meticulously cleaning a military-grade sniper rifle, locked up. Carter didn't hear the coldness in my voice. He was entirely consumed by his own desperate delusion. Tears actually welled up in his eyes as he looked at me with what he probably thought was agonizing devotion. "You don't have to pretend anymore," Baby Carter choked out, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "I see it all clearly now. I was so blind. You signed that contract to protect me. You sacrificed your own life, your own body, giving yourself to that monster just to pay off my debt. You played the villain so I could have a future." I stopped wiping the barrel. For a moment, the sheer, staggering magnitude of his narcissism rendered me speechless. He actually believed he was the tragic hero of this story. He genuinely thought my marriage to the most dangerous man in New York was a selfless act of martyrdom for his sake. "I am here to rescue you." Carter continued pulling a crumpled flash drive from his pocket. "I know it has been hell, Ethan. I know what he forces you to do. But I have a plan. If you can just get into Valenti's private safe and download his ledger onto this drive, I can hand it over to the feds. We can get witness protection. We can run away together. We can go back to how we were." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the conservatory. I picked up the massive, armor-piercing round from the table. I held it up to the light, inspecting the brass casing before sliding it smoothly into the magazine. A sharp, metallic click sounded. "Carter," I said, my voice softer than silk and colder than ice. He looked up, a pathetic, hopeful smile on his lips. "Yes, baby." I slammed the magazine into the rifle. The metallic clack echoed like a gunshot in the glass room. I hoisted the heavy weapon, resting the bipod on the table, and aligned my eye with the high-powered telescopic scope. I aimed it directly past his left ear toward the sprawling gardens outside. "Step slightly to the right," I instructed calmly. "Your head is blocking the windage flag." Carter froze. The color drained completely from his face as he stared down the barrel of the massive weapon. "Ethan, what are you doing?" "It is me." "It is Carter." I didn't lower the gun. I didn't even look at him outside of the scope's periphery. "I know exactly who you are. You are a bad investment I wrote off 2 months ago. You are a bug that crawled into my house, ruining the aesthetic of my marble floors. I didn't marry Dominic Valenti to save you, Carter. I married him because I realized that being a king's consort is infinitely more entertaining than being a coward's maid." You are brainwashed," Carter stammered, backing away, terror finally piercing through his delusion. "He broke your mind, Ethan, please." "Rico," I called out, not raising my voice. From the shadows of the hallway, Dominic's heavily tattooed underboss stepped into the light. He had clearly been standing there the entire time, letting me handle the intrusion. He smirked, cracking his knuckles. "Yes, boss." "The trash blew in from the storm," I said, finally pulling my eye away from the scope to look at Carter with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "Take it out. Break his legs and throw him in the gutter in front of Wall Street. Let his old friends see what happens to beggars who trespass on Valenti territory." Carter screamed as Rico grabbed him by the collar, dragging him effortlessly across the floor. "Ethan, no, you loved me. You can't do this. You are a monster. You are just like him." I know I whispered to the empty room as the doors slammed shut, cutting off his pathetic cries. But my moment of triumph was violently interrupted. The wail of a perimeter breach alarm suddenly shrieked through the estate. The heavy glass of the conservatory rattled. In the distance, toward the main gates, the unmistakable sound of automatic gunfire erupted. Before I could even stand up, the doors flew open again. It was Dominic. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in full tactical gear, a Kevlar vest strapped over a black combat shirt, an assault rifle gripped tightly in his hands. There was a smear of soot across his jawline, and his gray eyes were storms of absolute terrifying fury. The Syndicate's internal tensions had finally snapped. The rebel factions had made their move. It wasn't just an ambush, it was a full-scale civil war for the throne of New York. They breached the outer wall. Dominic barked, striding across the room. He didn't look scared. He looked like the Reaper collecting his due. But when he looked at me, the lethal edge softened for a fraction of a second. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a sleek black envelope, slapping it down on the table next to my sniper rifle. "What is this?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "A first-class ticket on a private charter to Geneva, departing from JFK in exactly 2 hours. It has a new passport, offshore accounts, everything you need." Dominic said, his voice a low, urgent rumble. He stepped close, cupping my face with a heavy, gloved hand. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone. "The dogs are at the gate, Ethan. It is going to be a bloodbath." I cannot guarantee your safety if you stay in this city tonight." He stared deep into my eyes, giving me the one thing no one else ever had an absolute, unadulterated choice. "If you are afraid, take the car waiting out back and go. I will ensure you live a long, luxurious, peaceful life. But if you stay, there is no going back. You will be stained with blood. You will be a target for the rest of your life. You will rule in hell by my side." He didn't wait for my answer. He kissed me a hard, desperate, bruising kiss that tasted of gunpowder and finality before turning and walking back into the war zone, the doors shutting heavily behind him. An hour later, I was standing outside Terminal 4 at JFK Airport. The rain was pouring down, slicking the neon signs of the departure gates into blurry streaks of light. The black SUV that had brought me here was idling at the curb. The driver was waiting. The plane was fueled. Freedom, safety, and a pristine life were waiting for me just past the sliding glass doors. I looked down at the black envelope in my hands. I looked at the heavy black diamond sitting on my ring finger. Behind me, the city of New York burned the sky, glowing faintly orange over the distant skyline. Somewhere in that inferno, the man who had bought my soul was fighting to keep his empire. I stood there in the freezing rain, suspended between the light of a normal life and the suffocating darkness of the underworld. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath of the cold air, and made my choice. The heavy black cardstock of the boarding pass felt like lead between my fingers. JFK to Geneva. One way, it was the ultimate golden ticket, a guaranteed escape from the blood, the bullets, and the suffocating darkness of the Valenti Empire. I stood under the awning of Terminal 4, the freezing New York rain violently washing over the concrete. The automatic sliding doors open with a soft whooshing sound, offering a blast of warm, sterile airport air. A normal life was waiting right on the other side. A life where I restored lamps, drank cheap coffee, and never had to look down the barrel of a sniper rifle. I looked down at the ticket. Then I looked at the massive black diamond resting on my left hand. I remembered the agonizing vulnerability in Dominic's storm cloud eyes when he had almost lost control. I remembered the heavy, crushing weight of his embrace on the ruined marble floor, the way his heart had hammered against my chest. He had given me a kingdom, and in return he had given me the one thing nobody else ever had a choice. I didn't step through the doors. With a terrifyingly calm deliberation, I tore the boarding pass in half, then into quarters. I let the pieces fall from my hands, watching them stick to the wet pavement, dissolving into the storm. I turned back to the idling black SUV. The driver, a heavily scarred loyalist named Marco, rolled down the window, his eyes wide with disbelief. Boss Marco stammered over the pouring rain. "What are you doing? The Don ordered me to put you on that plane." "The Don is my husband," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the storm like a blade. I opened the passenger door and climbed in, pulling the heavy door shut. "And his queen belongs on the chessboard, not in hiding." Turn the car around, Marco. "Take me home." Marco swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel. He didn't argue. He slammed the SUV into gear, and the tires shrieked against the asphalt as we tore back toward Long Island. By the time we breached the private access road to the estate, the sky was glowing with the sickly orange hue of a raging fire. The front gates had been blown off their hinges. The manicured gardens were a war zone littered with the bodies of rebel faction soldiers and Valenti loyalists. The staccato sound of automatic gunfire echoed through the trees. "Keep the engine running," I ordered Marco, grabbing the spare 9mm Glock tucked under the passenger seat. I racked the slide, the metallic click grounding my racing heartbeat. I didn't go through the front. I slipped through the shadows of the hedge maze, navigating the perimeter until I reached the shattered glass doors of the conservatory. The estate was in total chaos. Smoke billowed through the grand hallways, stinging my eyes. I moved silently, my bare feet avoiding the broken glass until I reached the mezzanine overlooking the grand foyer. Below me was a scene straight out of Dante's Inferno. Dominic was a blur of lethal, calculated violence. He was out of ammunition, fighting hand-to-hand against 3 mercenaries. He snapped a man's arm with a sickening crunch, using the mercenary's own body as a shield against incoming fire. He was an unstoppable force of nature, a reaper collecting his harvest. But he was only human, and he was completely blind to the rebel sniper crawling along the opposite balcony, lining up the crosshairs directly with the back of Dominic's head. "Dom," I screamed, my voice tearing my throat raw. I didn't think. I vaulted over the low marble railing, sprinting across the mezzanine. I leveled my Glock with both hands, just as Dominic had taught me, and squeezed the trigger. 2 loud gunshots echoed rapidly. My bullets hit the sniper in the chest, sending him crashing over the balcony, but as he fell, his finger twitched on his rifle's trigger. A deafening roar split the air. Searing, blinding agony erupted in my left side. The force of the high-caliber round didn't hit me dead on, but it grazed my ribs, tearing through my shirt and throwing me violently against the marble wall. I collapsed, gasping for air, as a hot, wet stickiness began to spread across my waist. Ethan. The sound Dominic made wasn't a shout. It was the horrific, gut-wrenching roar of a wounded beast. He dropped the mercenary he was holding and sprinted up the sweeping staircase, taking the steps 3 at a time. He slid to his knees beside me, his massive hands hovering over my bleeding side, trembling violently. "You came back," he choked out, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute terror and devastating love. "You idiot. You beautiful, reckless idiot. Why didn't you get on the plane?" I do not run," I wheezed, pressing my hand against my ribs. "I am fine. It is just a graze." Rico Dominic roared down into the foyer, his voice shaking the walls. The remaining rebels were already fleeing, outgunned by the arriving Valenti reinforcements. "Secure the perimeter. Nobody leaves alive." He turned back to me, his gray eyes dark with panic. "I need to coordinate the lockdown, but I have to stop your bleeding. Get down to my private bunker in the sub-basement. The biometric lock will recognize your handprint. There is a military trauma kit inside. Go now. I will be down in exactly 3 minutes." He kissed my forehead, a desperate bloody smear of a kiss, before turning back to the war. I staggered to my feet, gritting my teeth against the burning pain in my side. I navigated the hidden elevator behind the library, descending deep into the bedrock beneath the estate. The sub-basement was eerily quiet, entirely insulated from the chaos above. I reached the heavy titanium door of Dominic's private sanctum. I pressed my bloody palm against the scanner. A green light flashed, and the door hissed open. I stumbled inside, the motion sensor lights flickering to life. I expected a sterile medical bay, or perhaps a vault filled with millions in untraceable cash. What I saw made me stop dead in my tracks. The pain in my side vanished, replaced by a cold, breathless shock. It wasn't a vault. It was a shrine. The walls were covered in high-resolution photographs, maps, and surveillance logs, but they weren't intel on rival Mafia families. They were pictures of me. My breath hitched as I walked slowly into the center of the room. There were hundreds of them. A photo of me drinking coffee at my favorite diner in Brooklyn, dated 3 years ago. A photo of me restoring a Victorian chandelier at the antique shop, dated 5 years ago. A photo of me laughing in Central Park. And Carter. There were dozens of photos of Carter, but in every single one his face was violently crossed out, with thick, aggressive slashes of black ink. My trembling hands reached out, touching a thick dossier lying on the steel desk in the center of the room. The label read, "Hayes Financial Capture." I opened it. The documents inside were a meticulously detailed architectural blueprint of Carter's total financial ruin. Dominic hadn't just bought Carter's debt. He had orchestrated it. He had created dummy corporations to feed Carter bad investments, manipulated the stock market to crush his firm, and specifically targeted his assets until Carter was drowning in $30 million of debt. The surrogate marriage contract wasn't a desperate compromise Dominic had accepted. It was the trap he had spent years building. He had squeezed Carter's throat until the arrogant Wall Street coward had no choice but to hand me over on a silver platter. But why? Why go to such psychotic astronomical lengths for an antique restore? My eyes drifted to the center of the wall. There, framed in thick black wood, was a single faded photograph. It wasn't surveillance. It was a grainy security camera still from an alleyway in the Bronx. The timestamp was exactly 7 years ago. It showed a much younger version of me wearing a worn-out winter coat. Kneeling in the muddy snow next to me was a teenage boy bleeding heavily from a stab wound to the gut, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. I was wrapping my own scarf around his wound, hiding him behind a dumpster as the flashing lights of rival gang cars swept past the alley. I touched the glass of the frame. The memories flooded back. The boy with the storm cloud eyes. I had saved his life, called an ambulance from a payphone, and vanished into the night because I was terrified. I had forgotten his face. But Dominic Valenti had never forgotten mine. I stood in the center of the surveillance room, the blood from my ribs soaking into my shirt. By all conventional logic, I should have been terrified. I was standing in the epicenter of a dangerous, possessive, all-consuming obsession. I had been manipulated, tracked, and trapped by a predator. But as I looked at the walls, I didn't feel fear. I felt an overwhelming, devastating wave of awe. Carter had thrown me away to climb a social ladder. Dominic had burned down the financial world, manipulated the elite, and risked his entire empire just to bring me back to him. This wasn't just love. It was a worship so violent it defied the laws of nature. I heard the hiss of the titanium door opening behind me. Dominic stepped into the room. He was holding a trauma kit, his chest heaving. When he saw me standing in the center of the room, looking at the walls of photographs, he froze. The Reaper of New York, the man who had just slaughtered a dozen mercenaries, looked absolutely terrified. Ethan Dominic whispered, his voice cracking, his hands dropping to his sides. "I can explain. I did not want to frighten you. I just couldn't let you go." I turned around to face him. I looked at the blood on his hands, the soot on his face, and the desperate naked vulnerability in his eyes. He was waiting for me to scream. He was waiting for me to call him a monster and run. Instead, I reached out and picked up the heavy black tactical coat he had left draped over the desk chair. It was massive, smelling of gunpowder and him. I slid it over my shoulders, the oversized fabric swallowing me like a dark, protective armor. I walked slowly across the room, ignoring the sting in my side, until I was standing right in front of him. I reached up, wrapping my arms around his neck, and pulled him down into a bruising, desperate kiss. Dominic gasped against my lips, his massive arms instantly coming around my waist, lifting me off the floor as he kissed me back with the hunger of a starving man. When I finally pulled back, resting my forehead against his, I looked deep into his storm cloud eyes. "Next time you want to marry me, Dominic," I whispered, a dark, genuine smile curving my lips. "Just ask. It is much cheaper than bankrupting Wall Street." The obsidian tower pierced the Manhattan night sky like a jagged shard of black glass. On the 75th floor, inside the soundproof panoramic boardroom, the city looked like a glittering carpet of crushed diamonds. It was exactly midnight. Rumors had spread through the underworld like a wildfire. Dominic Valenti had fallen. A calculated leak from our own inner circle stated that the Reaper of New York had succumbed to his wounds during the estate ambush and was currently lying in an irreversible coma in a highly classified medical bay. The wolves had immediately come out to feast. Standing in the shadows of the antechamber hidden behind mirrored glass, I watched the traitors celebrate. Vincenzo, the rebel capo who had orchestrated the hit, sat at the head of the massive obsidian table. To his right sat Spencer, sipping expensive champagne with a haughty, victorious smirk. And to his left sat Carter. Carter looked entirely rejuvenated. He had traded his ruined, rain-soaked clothes for a borrowed designer suit. He looked like a man who believed he had just successfully navigated a hurricane and landed on an island of solid gold. To the new era, Vincenzo announced, raising his glass. The remaining syndicate heads, those who had turned their backs on the Valenti name, raised theirs in agreement. With the Reaper in the ground, the city is finally ours to divide. And to our friends in Wall Street and City Hall who helped us bypass Valenti's political shields. Carter smiled, a sickening, arrogant curve of his lips. "It was my pleasure, Vincenzo. Dominic Valenti was a brute. And as for my ex, I assume he ran away when the shooting started." Probably crying in an airport terminal, Spencer giggled, leaning against Carter. Good riddance to the charity case. I didn't wait for another word. I pushed the heavy double doors open. They didn't just swing, they slammed against the marble walls with a sound like a thunderclap. The laughter died instantly. The clinking of glasses stopped. Every eye in the room snapped toward the entrance. I walked in alone. I wasn't wearing my thrift store suits or my silk pajamas. I was wearing Dominic's clothes. I had rolled up the sleeves of a crisp white dress shirt, and draped over my shoulders, hanging like the dark cape of an executioner, was Dominic's oversized black suit jacket. It smelled of sandalwood and cordite. On my left hand, catching the harsh glare of the chandelier, the massive black diamond signet ring commanded absolute silence. I didn't look at Carter. I didn't look at Spencer. I walked with slow, deliberate, terrifying grace straight toward the head of the table. Ethan Carter gasped, standing up so fast, his chair scraped violently against the floor. His eyes widened, a mixture of shock and that same pathetic, delusional savior complex flooding his face. "Ethan, what are you doing here? Valenti is dead. You don't have to wear his clothes. You don't have to pretend anymore. Come here. You are safe now." I stopped halfway down the length of the table. I slowly turned my head to look at him. The amber eyes he used to call warm were now as cold and dead as a frozen lake. "Sit down, Carter," I said. My voice wasn't a shout. It was a soft, lethal whisper that carried the absolute weight of a command. before I have your tongue removed for speaking out of turn." Carter froze the blood draining from his face as he finally truly registered the freezing emptiness in my gaze. He slowly sank back into his chair. Vincenzo, however, recovered his nerve. He let out a harsh, barking laugh, slapping his hand on the table. "Well, well, the little lamp restorer wants to play Mafia. Listen to me, boy. Your husband is a vegetable. You have no army, no power, and absolutely no right to be in this room. Take off that ring and get out before I decide to keep you as a pet." I didn't blink. I reached into the oversized pocket of Dominic's jacket and pulled out a silver flash drive. I tossed it onto the center of the obsidian table. It clattered loudly in the silence. That I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls, is the offshore transaction log from the Moretti cartel in Chicago. 2 days ago, $50 million was wired to a shell company owned by you, Vincenzo. You didn't just orchestrate a hit on your Don, you sold out the New York syndicate to our oldest enemies. Gasps rippled through the room. The other syndicate heads stared at Vincenzo, their expressions morphing from allegiance to pure, horrified betrayal. Dealing with the Chicago cartel was the one unforgivable sin in our laws. It was an automatic death sentence. "It is a lie," Vincenzo roared, his face turning purple with rage. He shoved his chair back, his hand flying to the holster under his jacket. "Kill him. Shoot the little bastard." My body moved before my conscious mind even fully processed the command. The muscle memory Dominic had drilled into me took over. I didn't flinch. I didn't hesitate. I drew the 9mm Glock from my waistband, leveled it with both hands, and squeezed the trigger. A deafening gunshot shattered the silence. Vincenzo's head snapped back. A perfect fatal crimson bloom appeared right between his eyes. He stood frozen for a fraction of a second before collapsing forward, his face slamming into the obsidian table, knocking over his champagne glass. The room erupted into absolute paralyzed terror. The other syndicate heads threw their hands in the air, backing away from the table. I stood there, the gun still raised, a thin wisp of smoke curling from the barrel. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I looked at the body of the man I had just killed, and I felt nothing but the cold, heavy satisfaction of protecting my empire. "Ah!" Spencer shrieked, pressing himself against the glass wall, tears streaming down his face. "You are crazy. You are a murderer." He scrambled for his phone, his hands shaking violently as he dialed. "I am calling my father. He is the mayor. He has the police tactical unit on standby downstairs. You are going to prison for the rest of your life. You psycho." Carter looked at me, completely broken, his delusions of rescuing me shattered into a million pieces. "Ethan, my God, what have you become?" "I became exactly what you sold me to be," I replied, coldly lowering the gun. The heavy doors at the back of the room burst open again. Spencer let out a sob of relief. Dad, thank God, arrest him. He just killed Vincenzo. He is insane." Mayor Hayes stormed into the room, flanked by 6 heavily armed tactical officers. But he didn't look at Vincenzo's body. He didn't look at his crying son. He looked directly at me, his face pale, sweating profusely. To the absolute mind-shattering shock of Carter and Spencer, the mayor of New York City didn't order an arrest. He walked past his own son, marched straight up to where I was standing, and violently slapped Spencer across the face, sending the boy crashing to the floor. "Shut your mouth, you stupid, arrogant fool," the mayor roared at his son. Then the most powerful political figure in the city turned to me. His knees buckled. He dropped to the marble floor, bowing his head in total, absolute submission. He reached out with a trembling hand lightly touching the hem of my oversized black jacket. "Forgive him, Queen," the mayor pleaded, his voice cracking with terror. "My son is an idiot. I swear my absolute loyalty to the Valenti family. Please, spare my bloodline." The silence that followed was heavier than a collapsing star. Spencer lay on the floor, holding his red cheek, his mind entirely incapable of processing what he was seeing. Carter looked like he was having a stroke. He stared at the mayor, groveling at my feet, and the horrifying reality finally crushed him. He hadn't just thrown away a good partner. He had thrown away the ruler of New York and aligned himself with a pathetic, disposable pawn. I looked down at the mayor. "Your son's life is spared, Mayor, but his privileges are revoked. Strip his trust fund. If I ever see him in a venue above 14th Street again, I won't use a bullet. I will use a knife." Yes, of course, Your Grace," the mayor babbled, scrambling backward. "Excellent display of mercy to sorrow." The voice came from the shadows of the antechamber, deep, resonant, dripping with lethal alpha authority. Carter let out a choked gasp as Dominic Valenti stepped into the light. He wasn't in a coma. He wasn't weak. He was dressed in a flawless midnight blue suit, looking like the terrifying god of the underworld he truly was. He walked past the trembling syndicate heads, ignoring the corpse on the table, and stopped right behind me. He wrapped his massive heavy arms around my waist, pulling my back flush against his chest. He lowered his head, pressing a lingering possessive kiss to the side of my neck, right over my pulse point for everyone in the room to see. "I leave you alone for 10 minutes, and you have already conquered the boardroom," Dominic murmured, his voice rumbling against my spine. I leaned back into his warmth, resting my hand over his where it gripped my waist. I looked at Carter. The Wall Street golden boy was trembling tears of pure, unadulterated regret and terror spilling down his cheeks. He had absolutely nothing left. No money, no status, no future. "Take the trash out," I said, my eyes locked on my ex. "All of it." Dominic smirked, his grip tightening around me. He looked at his waiting guards. "You heard the queen. Clear the room. The reign of the Valenti Empire has just begun." 6 months can feel like a fleeting breath, or it can be enough time to entirely rewrite the history of a city. It was a brilliant, sun-drenched Tuesday morning in late May. The relentless, freezing rain that had marked the night I signed away my life felt like it belonged to a different century. On the corner of 42nd Street, deep in the shadows of Times Square, a man in a stained, ill-fitting uniform wiped down the sticky counter of a rundown diner. He paused, his hands rough and blistered from minimum wage labor, and looked up through the greasy window. High above the chaotic New York traffic blazing across a massive 3-story digital billboard was a live broadcast of the city's annual charity gala. The camera panned across the red carpet, stopping to focus on the hosts of the evening. It was me. I was wearing a pristine, tailored white suit, a stark, poetic contrast to the cheap one I had worn in that abandoned cathedral. Standing right beside me, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back, was Dominic Valenti. The media called us the untouchable kings of New York's elite. They praised my newly launched multi-million-dollar antique restoration foundation, blissfully unaware that it was the perfect, legitimate front for the most powerful underworld syndicate on the East Coast. Down in the diner, Carter stared at the screen. The mop slipped from his hands. His delusions were entirely gone, replaced by the crushing, inescapable reality of his own making. He had thrown away a diamond to chase a fake crown, and now he was nothing but dust under my shoes. Somewhere in the city, Spencer was likely bussing tables cut off from his family's wealth after the mayor had been forced into early quiet retirement by my husband's invisible hand. I didn't need to pull a trigger to end them. The greatest revenge wasn't death. It was living a life so blindingly radiant, so entirely out of their reach, that it burned them just to look at it. "You are burning the toast, Tesoro." The deep, gravelly voice pulled me out of my thoughts. I blinked, the bustling image of Times Square fading from my mind, replaced by the serene, sunlit expanse of our penthouse kitchen. I was standing barefoot on the heated hardwood floor, wearing nothing but one of Dominic's oversized white dress shirts. The smell of freshly ground coffee and lightly charred sourdough filled the air. I reached over and popped the toast out, turning to find Dominic leaning against the marble island. He was shirtless, his dark sweatpants hanging low on his hips. The morning light caught the jagged silvery scar on his shoulder, the bullet he had taken for me during the siege. He didn't look like the Reaper of New York right now. He just looked like the man I loved. I walked over to him carrying 2 mugs of black coffee. I handed him one, leaning up to press a soft, lingering kiss against the corner of his mouth. "I was just thinking," I murmured, taking a sip of my coffee, "about the rain, about that night in Brooklyn." Dominic's expression softened. He set his mug down and wrapped his massive arms around my waist, pulling me flush against his chest. He buried his face in my neck, inhaling deeply, a habit he had never broken since the night the bloodlust had almost consumed him. I was his anchor, and he made sure I knew it every single day. "Do you regret it?" Dominic asked, his voice a low rumble against my skin. "Do you ever wish you had taken that ticket to Geneva?" I smiled, resting my chin on his broad shoulder, my fingers tracing the lines of his tattoo. "Geneva is too quiet," I replied. "And besides, who would keep the wolves in line if I left?" Dominic let out a rich, genuine laugh. It was a sound few people in the world ever got to hear, warm, deep, and entirely free of shadows. He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes. His storm cloud gaze was clear, filled with an absolute terrifying devotion that still made my heart skip a beat. "You used to fix broken lamps, Ethan," he whispered, his thumb gently caressing the heavy black diamond ring on my left hand. "Now you have fixed an entire empire. You fixed me." "You weren't broken, Dom," I said softly, reaching up to cup his jaw. "You were just fighting in the dark for too long. You just needed someone to turn on the light." He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes for a fraction of a second, absorbing the peace that only existed within the walls of our home. In the beginning, I had thought I was a victim, a pawn sacrificed on a chessboard of greed and violence. But Dominic hadn't dragged me into hell to torture me. He had pulled me out of a mediocre life to give me a throne. He had loved me with a fierce, possessive madness that defied all logic, and in return I had found the strength I never knew I possessed. True courage isn't about never feeling fear. It is about looking at the monster in the dark, recognizing the bruised, beating heart beneath the armor, and deciding to hold its hand anyway. Dominic kissed me slow, sweet, and promising 1,000 tomorrows. There were no sirens outside, no gunfire, just the soft hum of the city moving far below us. The doors of the penthouse were locked, but for the first time in my life, the doors to my future were completely, fearlessly open. And as long as the devil was holding my hand, I was ready for whatever came next.